Okay, looks like we are live. Welcome to Kindly Ops Talk Show, where we will we will be talking about all sorts of things today, I'm sure. But really, it's a talk show about helping people work together, bending technology to be able to help us all work together, no matter where we are located throughout the entire world. And there's a little delay. Sorry about that. Had a little YouTube live streaming issue there. Just nice to come right back and enjoy just on that 5 second delay or so. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about human-centered interactions over video. We know video is in the future is not the future. It's the now. It's the current state we're in. We're all doing things on video, whether it's video conferences, happy hours, virtual events, all interviews, all of these things. So how can we have a warm, engaging conversation over video just like we would if we were face to face with someone? As a quick reminder to those that to our attendees, if you have a question, feel free to ask it. We can type it in the question and answer box. And if you see a question that you think that you really want to have answered here by one of our panelists, then go ahead and you can upvote that question, and we will definitely get to it for you. So to begin, we want to just again, go into what this really means. Human-centered interaction over video. So maybe talking about like really what does that mean? What does that mean to you? What does that mean in your application and how you use video conferencing? So maybe to begin with this discussion, why don't we go ahead and actually, I really like to get Whitney's opinion on this. How do you feel that your communication, maybe over video like this, has kind of changed since COVID-19 and the pandemic and all the issues that have caused this to be so popular?
Um, it's interesting that you say that since COVID changed. I feel like it's kind of been within 2019 and it's crossed over into 2020 of where I noticed that it was really beneficial, mostly for my business, to do talking head videos and responding to people via talking head videos. I felt like it probably propelled my business more than like 50% is like the positive results, and income wise too, just from replying to people over talking head videos. I honestly haven't done a ton within 2020, just because I got really sick, but I'm gearing up to do it and switch more into live streaming than doing like single talking head videos, but mostly through Instagram. I haven't used a ton through Zoom. I think it's because I like to hold my phone, and I feel like the closer I am to the phone responding to somebody, it's a huge difference. It's way different from sending an email or texting someone any sort of, like in my business, it's usually product recommendations or some sort of hair consulting for another salon. But it's a game changer. Video, when you respond back, people are touched to their heart, but they don't seem to be really touched to their heart over like writing something out. So yeah, it's huge.
Elliot?
Um, I've been using video to do interviews and like use like live two-way conversations on video for about 15 years. You know, shortly after Skype started coming out, like we were excited about it enough that we bought machines for Skype. And what really stood out to me are the things that were missing on a voice-only conversation. And that's mostly nonverbal communication. So if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people on a phone call, you're not going to get a lot of like constant verbal communication of these things. Like, tell me more. Oh, I'm really bored now. Like, whoa, what did my dog just do? Like nobody's going to verbalize those things. But on video, that's what you're seeing is all the nonverbal communication, you know, whether there's confusion or restlessness or interest, and you just adapt to that in real time. And so it dramatically improves the rate at which you can form a connection with another person. So that was the big jump forward for me, going from no video at all to having video calls. And then I think we're in the midst, like Whitney said, of yet another leap forward and are exploring like, how do we make it even better? Now that we have video at all, how do we make it even better?
I like that thought, and I also like the thought of Whitney talking about being comfortable holding something and talking at it or with it. What do you like, Elliot? I mean, sorry, Kevin. Go ahead. Sure.
Totally agree that with what Whitney and Elliot said. There's one interesting thing to think about in assessing your own personal, what are you going to do on video to improve your ability to interact with folks. But thinking through your actual personal interactions, like Elliot mentioned that he was doing these video meetings for a long time now, but Whitney is kind of pivoting to the type of meeting she's doing to be over Zoom. But depending on your workday, you might be in this app, or you might be in that app, or you might be in another app. And so just like thinking through of like, what human connection problems do I have in my interactions that are high priority for me to get around? Like Elliot mentioned, not being able to tell when people are distracted. If you're having a lot of detail-oriented conversations where you're offloading information to people, that's a very important thing to do over video if you want to have that confirmation that people are actually processing what you're doing. And I don't want to pivot too hard here, but that also informs whether or not you bother with stuff like a teleprompter or a big giant multi-view display, because if you need to keep an eye on everyone and you have a speaker view going on a teleprompter, you're not doing that. So there's just a lot of things to evaluate about your own personal need to use video.
Oh, that's great. Whitney?
When I first started doing it, it happened kind of by accident because I had so many people DMing me through Instagram asking very, customized questions. And I felt like I was spending the entire day just writing out these thoughtful responses. And it was taking me like 3 days of work. And then finally one day I was just like, I'm just going to video back this person. And the response immediately from it was, oh my goodness, I can't believe you even took the time to respond and with a video. It was huge. And that response like happens over and over again, but they don't realize that like actually for me, it is a complete time waster for me to do these like very thoughtful messages. But a 30-second video, I can talk really fast, they can replay it, and they feel like I actually care about them enough to respond in this thoughtful way. And thankfully for Kevin, like for a while I was just doing them like I'm sitting in the car right before I run to do an errand, but I really want to thoughtfully reply to this person. But now I have Kevin to like help me with the video setup so that we can do that in a more workflow, a better workflow, I guess, through the days, that I can like just thoughtfully respond with a simple lighting setup to somebody, their question. It's definitely helped us a lot in the, I guess, yeah, just growing our business.
So that's interesting, because really what you guys are both saying is the importance, or indicating is the importance of like, whether you're holding it in your hand and you're looking directly at the person, or you're using a teleprompter and you're communicating a lot of information, or a lot of detailed information in a more perhaps office or corporate setting, is the importance of eye contact in having these human-centered interactions. What are some ways in which maybe just your kind of average, or not average, but just anyone in general could start using eye contact? What are some things that they would need to do to be able to have that, and to be able to use it effectively in their communication over video? Go ahead and start with Sam.
Yeah, I think that use of your eyes works differently in video conferencing to how it does in person. And essentially you need to do it more, because there's so many barriers between you and the person on that other side that simply don't exist when you're sitting together in the same context. You're experiencing the same temperature in the room, you've got the same distractions outside and that sort of thing. And if someone is looking off everywhere, they might be looking at a script or like something else that's relevant to the conversation. But as far as what you know about what they're doing, it's just they're not paying attention to you. And something else that I thought was interesting was when Apple introduced iOS 13, I believe it was 13, they brought this thing in where if you're using a Face ID phone, it will essentially, you're looking at the screen, you're not looking in that camera, but it's basically making digital eyes for you as if you were looking at the camera plane. which is kind of creepy when you notice it, but it really speaks, like that's a mainstream application of, yeah, you got to have that eye contact, and more than what it would be comfortable in person, essentially.
Oh, that's a really good point, Elliot.
And to continue that, like, you got to remember that although we are on video, other people can't see what's outside your frame. And I love that you mentioned the temperature in the room, right? We're not sharing that. And so when you're in a conference room with people and a delivery truck rolls up with lunch, and there's, you know, a cart with 10 pizzas that are smelling good stacked outside the glass conference room wall, the eyes and leaning, you know, towards that, everybody understands what's going on in the room. But when there's like an emergency plumbing leak and somebody's banging on your front door, nobody else outside your frame knows that any of that is happening. And so the facial expressions and the eye contact can't help you there. You have to make a lot of that stuff explicit. And I think that's a big part of being human-centered about this, is just like acknowledging our humanity and like the things we have to deal with, making them explicit. Hey, I'm real sorry, there's somebody delivering something at the door, or the next door house is on fire or whatever. I have to go for 1 minute. I'll be right back, right? Make it explicit and give each other permission rather than like trying to pretend it's not happening. Makes everything feel so much more bearable.
Is there something about that though that's kind of interesting, or there is something about that that's something that's interesting, because, you know, if you're having a discussion, even if it was a maybe a more professional discussion over the phone, or maybe a video or a phone interview or something like that, in the past, especially when we think about like having an actual corded like landline, you would just be like, oh, you know what? Oh, hold on a second. I got somebody at the door. Hold on a second. I gotta do something for my son or my daughter. But we don't, for some reason, want to do that over video, Elliot.
So I have to tell a quick story of one of my favorite interviews. Was when I was leaving working in an office and I was trying to get a job working at this distributed company. This was quite a few years ago. And so the CTO of the company was based in Finland. I was based on the East Coast of the US. And I don't remember where in the world he actually was, but for some reason I got a call for the interview with very little notice on my cell phone at like 8:30 at night. I was at Target. So I step outside of the store and I'm standing outside of a Target and I'm hearing these very thick accents yelling at each other with bad directions. Oh, they were in Seattle. That's what it was. So it wasn't evening for them yet. They were like, had left the office and were on their way to a business dinner. And it's the CTO and the head of architecture, like yelling at a cab driver, trying to get these, like, who knows what's going on. It was very, very chaotic. And I knew in that moment, like, that is like super unprofessional in one way, but I knew, I was like, I want to work with these people. Like, they are not putting on any pretenses whatsoever. They're being so real about who they are and what is happening in their life right now. Like, I want to work with these people.
Oh, that's an awesome example. I like that a lot. We have a question from Lance. He says, how have the recent pandemic-related restrictions opened your eyes to digital forms of socializing? Ones that maybe we didn't even know previously existed or utilized, like, for example, like international happy hours or cross-country art collaborations or something along those lines. How do you think that those have kind of like changed over the past 6 months, Kevin?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt has a cool website. I think it's called Hit Record, that I wasn't really aware of existing before COVID started affecting everything, but I came across it somehow from YouTube. But the basic idea there is that you as an individual can submit a element of a creative goal, and other people can adopt that same plan or take it up and recycle it. And it's basically like driven by the idea that all of the things and results that are going to be on that platform are going to get created by people collaborating. And it's new and people have to wrap their head around it. But there's some cool stuff where people were really entertaining their kids, it seems like, with it, by having them be like, oh, let's go on here and see what somebody else made and then what we can make with that, and then contribute that back and see what other people do with it. So that was one thing I had no idea about before this started, that now I'm like, oh, that's a pretty cool way for people to kind of get together even though they're far apart.
Is that video specific? Do you know?
It actually seems like it's a little bit more focused on folks creating music, but the example that got my attention of it is Joseph Gordon-Levitt was getting really frustrated, and so he was using his own platform to do some stuff, and some people submitted elements, and they were like spoken word elements that he wanted, so it's just their voice from their phone, and he went and remixed those up, and some other people did, and then he added music. I can't remember exactly what the end result was of his video, but it started with something as simple as different people reading lines, and then him taking as small as a piece is like one word that they would say.
Oh, super interesting. Sam?
I think that my personal example with this is probably typical of most people where, yeah, when it comes to those happy hours and that kind of thing, doing things like Jackbox TV over Zoom is like that sort of thing too, of just, it's like, yeah, this is this collaborative thing that I really enjoyed that sort of thing because it felt like you're almost in the same room as other people. Multiple different friends have done like trivia nights and that kind of thing. And have done them in different ways as well. One of them did it where, it's mostly verbal with the questions and that sort of thing. And then another one did it where another friend had it totally set up where it was a keynote presentation and it was based around that with little sound effects and that kind of thing. And it's really interesting, all these things that it's like, we didn't do this in person. But it's pretty good. But then for myself as well, I found with these happy hours, for instance, that's the most exhausting thing. And there's no natural stopping cues. It's like a conversation that's just an infinite scroll. And so after 2 hours of those things, I'm going to do the dishes or something. I can't do it anymore. And but which is an interesting part of that discussion of just how ego depletion factors into how you structure these things.
Oh yeah, that's really good. Elliot?
There's something there about performance, like we're all suddenly becoming thrust into being performers, not because necessarily we're getting anything from the performance, but because we want other people to be able to connect to us, to have like for relationship maintenance. And so like I've started doing some things with cooking and with washing the dishes, not because I particularly like those things, but because like it's very dramatic if I say that I'm making flour tortillas and like I'm on a Zoom call and I'm like splashing flour all over the kitchen. Everybody else on the call really enjoys it and it's like, oh, haha, Elliot's cooking. Like, what's that about? I'm seeing the cooking thing just come up over and over and over again, and from all these people that I never would have expected. Last week, Juan Pablo Bararaca gave a conference talk, a live conference talk at an engineering conference, talking about engineering metrics, but as a way of illustrating the point in his talk and to keep the audience on the hook during the entire thing, he was in his kitchen at home cooking a mushroom risotto and discussing the concept of mise en place as a metaphor for engineering metrics, right? And so like cooking is just showing up all over the place, but I think it's performance, like you said. And so it feels very one-sided. It feels necessary right now, but it doesn't feel like a thing that's working great.
Do you think that will change maybe our social interactions, like as things progress, like into 2021? For instance, like Sam was mentioning, it seems like it's just an endless scroll conversation. But you think that we'll get to a point where it's like, oh, I'm going to send a happy hour invite from specifically 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Hard stop at 7. See you guys later. Sam?
I really hope so. What I've seen people do is my wife's family will get together once a week for it, and what one of them started doing was like, oh, we'll use it from our account because they don't have a paid account, and they're like, well, it's 40 minutes, the time's up, and so as everybody collectively kind of starts to feel a little bit more of this exhaustion from it, it probably will become a thing where it's like, we're going to talk from this time to this time, and you don't have to have an excuse to run off or anything, but you're basically finishing at the peak of that conversation instead of just by the time everyone's exhausted and has nothing left to say.
Elliot? And then we'll have Whitney.
A thing I used to look for when hiring remotely was, is this person like taking care of themselves well enough, healthy enough that they have external commitments outside of work. If they're going to be working from home, do they have some external commitments that are going to trigger them to stop working and leave their house? A dog, music lessons, kids in school, like, are just looking for any kind of clue of like, does this person have something? And I think that's something that we're all missing now that we're locked at home, is like, we don't have anything forcing us to leave the house. It's quite the opposite. And so a thing like my coach just recommended to me is try to get one day where you have no meetings, or a certain amount of time that is blocked out where you have no meetings. I'm finding that very difficult over the last week, but that's the thing I'm going to try and start doing, is to try and have some meeting free time.
Excellent. Whitney?
I can't remember what I was gonna say. Sorry, guys.
No
And it's
problem.
not Elliot's fault. That's just my brain.
No problem. We'll come back to you, Sam.
I think that what Elliot just mentioned about blocking out time and that sort of thing, it totally fits in with that, the situation of working from home as opposed to an office, and having, if somebody has to work at the kitchen table, if that's their only place to work, and then every time they walk past it, whether it's 10 p.m. or 9 a.m., they're thinking about work. And we've been trying to think about this a lot, because there's the natural, what's called the doorway effect, where doorways, when you physically walk through a doorway, there is this almost mental reset that happens on a small scale as you move through. Your brain kind of clears itself. As you walk out of the office, that's what happens to your brain when you're on that commute home and that kind of thing. And so because we don't have these natural kind of cues for our brain to be able to just not have anything expected of it when it comes to social interaction, unless we choose it to, you got to be really deliberate about it to an extent that seems odd, but it really helps you out and sustains mental energy.
That's interesting. I mean, definitely something that everyone that's working from home right now is probably no doubt dealing with. But something behind that is also where is like scheduling this interaction over video. Like, for instance, Elliot mentioned, I want to schedule blocks of time where I'm not having meetings. Sam is mentioning I need to basically shift my frame of mind or my perspective. Do you see, or does anyone here on the panel maybe see a future where it's like, okay, we're going to treat video conferencing, video meetings the same way I would exactly in a traditional office setting? So it's like, okay, instead of hopping from call to call to call, I'm going to just be done for today, or I'm going to reschedule it, or I'm going to push it back. Because it seems like inherently right now people are having maybe scheduling calls has become a little bit more sophisticated, or maybe a little bit more set in stone, contextually speaking or socially speaking. How do you guys think that will change the flow of work in the future, especially like meeting people over, or having these meetings over video?
Are you talking about like ad hoc meetings?
Or like, for instance, ad hoc meetings for sure. Or, like previously in the office, it's like, oh yeah, could you meet in the conference room? Or if you have invites that, could you meet this day, this day, this day? But over video, it seems that speaking with people, it seems like their video meetings are more concrete. They're more set in stone. It's like, what is scheduled, I will be there. Do you think we'll have some more fluidity in the future as we get more used to doing this? Kevin?
Yeah, I think people's flakiness will, in general, increase as they get adjusted mentally to playing interference with something they used to just take seriously because it was new. And so, yeah, I think it's hard to make an accurate call on behavior until this is over and we're looking back at it. But it does seem like to me there's going to be some people who move kind of out to the forefront of quote unquote thought leadership in different industries because they get over themselves a lot more quickly, and they don't think of video as an extra layer, and they don't think of it as like more of their particular flavor of time. They look at it as the difference between them and the other 10 people who feel that way. And so they're just going to start winning more because they're not afraid to take an ad hoc video meeting and do really well at it, and they don't have a lack of skill set when it comes around presenting themselves or their information. And so you're going to see a gap happen over the next 18 months, I think, and probably a lot shorter than that, where there's just some people who are really good at it and everybody starts copying them. And then it becomes like what people think is the only version of it, which is where we've been pre-COVID, right? Which is like people had this version of work from home meetings, but they didn't have this level of them. They weren't in meetings on video for 14 hours a day like they are now when they're a CEO of something. And so I think you're going to see a ton of flakiness, and then you're going to see another extreme on the other side, which is people who are extremely professional at it. And those people are going to win for like a while until everybody else realizes they need to adjust.
That's excellent. Elliot?
And I think something that's in between, this goes back to what Whitney's been doing so well. And I actually took some inspiration from the stuff that she's been publishing. There's the real-time synchronous meeting, right? Two-way communication happening. And then there's like sharing some information in that friendly video format, but that is available for people to consume async. The connection is happening on the consuming side, right? So even though maybe I wasn't doing any live meetings on that day that I've blocked off, anything that I've published explaining any topic, like these little bite-sized videos that we're publishing, drawing that inspiration from Whitney, people can watch those all day long and they feel like they talked to me all day long. Even though I was like, whew, I'm feeling recharged. I have not been on video at all today. And so that is like this whole rich area that some people are starting to use, but a lot of people haven't figured out yet that any of the stuff that you publish, this goes back to like being a performer, any of the stuff that you publish can be consumed by people when it's the right time for them. And it doesn't take any more of your energy once you publish it the first time.
It's awesome, Whitney. And then we'll get Kevin.
That's it's really interesting since COVID and watching the hair industry completely change into this. Let's now get into virtual hair cutting. And for me, I haven't decided to go into virtual hair cutting because I just can't wrap my head around it. It took me 14 months to learn how to cut hair. I cannot teach somebody over an hour, like over video, even though some people are successfully doing it. It's just something I can't do. But what I had been working on was doing video consultations with consumers that want actual recommendations on their hair. Because what I was finding in my industry is there's a lot of consumers out there that actually don't have a stylist that's their own. So they get this product from Sephora, from other things. And that's like, I guess I didn't really realize that. I always just thought that everybody has their own stylist and that's where they get product from, or they get it from the grocery store or whatever. But the recent feedback I've had from people doing these like little video bites is that they're looking for people to do more videos on specific recommendations and will pay for you just to have like jump on a 25-minute call so they can just talk about their hair, because you can see their hair through the video and you can kind of describe what you're doing through that. And so what I've been doing is just like, well, I'm exhausted from doing these videos. Some days it's not my work day, but I feel good enough to do a couple of clips. So I'll just do a couple of like handheld videos in the backyard, whatever, talking about a subject, and I'll keep that as content. I'll just sit on it for a while instead of actually like putting it out that day. And then I can go back and just schedule the content, and using Facebook's tools, which I'm only recently starting to learn how to use them for the back end work. You can schedule all these. And with all these apps that are coming out that have the scheduling in it for stories, it saves people a ton of time, just like getting enough content banked for them and just like spitting it out there, because you can schedule yourself then to have like a work day to reply to everything. I think that's what's helped me have the best workflow, except for when you sit on a bunch of content, think you have put it out there, and somebody keeps asking you the same questions, because that keeps happening to me where I'm just like, oh, these people just don't get it. And then I realize like, oh, I didn't actually post that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's seems like when you're having these video interactions, you can be like, oh, okay, I've done this, I've communicated this, but it's like, oh wait, I haven't actually. That kind of maybe will help us pivot to like another aspect of interaction with video over, or excuse me, interaction with people over video. Like in the more office kind of more corporate setting. Right now, it seems everyone's using Zoom. Like we're using Zoom together. Some people use Skype. Some people use Google Meeting. But do you think that there is going to be perhaps? How do you think this will change? Maybe change streaming or video conferencing technologies. We've kind of touched on it. I think me and Kevin touched on it previously before we streamed. But do you think there's going to be like maybe different ways to interact with people that will be added on, features that will be developed that will continue to change this video world that we're living in?
Mm-hmm.
Brandon?
Yeah, Elliot kind of gave it away. I saw in the Discord the other day that app, mmhmm, and I watched the video on it, and it was amazing. Like, I particularly liked how you were able, or gonna be able to incorporate two different people in two different locations right next to each other, and then the background could be, you know, whatever it is you're talking about, whether it's a flow chart or a video of someone cutting hair, whatever it is, but two different people, and then you could shrink down the one guy and make the one other guy bigger. It was amazing. So this technology is getting pumped out so fast because of everyone's learning to grow in this new world that we're living in, and so the possibilities are endless. We're going to see things coming out, I'm sure, that we're like, man, like how did someone come up with this idea? But anyway, yeah, that seems pretty legit. I like that.
We'll have Elliot, and then we'll have Kevin. Sorry, we'll have Whitney, and then we'll have Kevin. Hey, Kevin, we'll have Kevin.
Oh, okay. Speaking about that's a really cool thing to see hitting the market, and I totally believe we're going to see a lot more of that hit the market, that type of stuff. That is particularly targeted at, in my opinion, a set of users that are going to, for a long time, hold out against upgrading their own personal equipment. And that's going to be a choice that they make, whether it's strategic or not. They'll find out in the future the effect of that strategy. But personally, I don't recommend that as something for people to get excited about if they think their job is dependent on effective presentations. I think it's a really great way for someone who occasionally is going to present some stuff to do a much better job of it and like be a lot more genuinely excited about what they can do with their presentation through the medium. But there's a bunch of layers of it that all operate around like, this is assuming the software is stable. And not that many people have used it, and it's still in beta. And so far, a lot of the software that exists today at that less than pro level is not that stable for like even like a 45-minute meeting. So like I've tried to use some little applets and stuff that are out there before, and often they'll kind of fall apart about 10-15 minutes into whatever you're doing.
So you say they're kind of like more of a quick fix. They're not maybe full production type use, especially in an actual like office or maybe corporate, more real world type situation. Kevin.
There's a lot of people that are mandated to use certain apps for their communication around these calls, and so I think a lot of those folks are going to be really enabled to do a better job in those things. So like I'm not trying to pick on Citrix, but like WebEx is a terrible kind of experience in my opinion for this type of thing that we're doing. But if somebody can make their video image have these other fancy things in it and not have the WebEx UI and like what they built into that platform get in their way, like I think that could be more effective that way. But to the same extent, I think people get really easily distracted with shiny things, and they haven't done that process of asking themselves, what problem am I actually trying to solve in my work? They're just like, there's a difference between those two approaches of this is shiny versus this is shiny and therefore I don't have to do these three things.
Nice. That's a interesting thought. When you think about maybe adding, people think they maybe don't think that hard about adding like a piece of software to their workflow, but they think way harder when it's adding a piece of hardware to their workflow, whether it be a camera or a microphone. Elliot?
And I think back to like other technological innovations that have happened and like them becoming available at a affordable price point to the majority of the population. And so this happened with blogging. So publishing, like before blogging hit the scene, like the options were you work for years and years to get into working at a paper or a magazine, and then, as a writer. Or you make a zine in your neighborhood. And so you can maybe reach more people than you can talk to in one day, but you can't really reach, anybody who lives far away. And then all of a sudden blogging was available to everybody. And so you see an explosion of low to medium quality content because it's just available to so many more people that were available. But what it doesn't change, I think, is how much work it takes to actually be a thoughtful, helpful writer, like sharing meaningful ideas, like deep thinking about something that actually touches people. And so I think we'll see that with video as well, where like lots of people will be able to go from 0 to mediocre, right? Like instead of you can't even hear or understand or see me and there's a bright light behind me, to like, now you're a colleague and we have a good work relationship and like we can communicate clearly. But it's such a long last mile from there to like, this is a really good friend and co-collaborator or partner for 10 years on deep and meaningful projects. That stuff still takes one-on-one communication, and it's very, very situation specific, and nothing replaces like bleeding on a project together. However it is that you're communicating around it. But like that stuff still takes tremendous effort to get those tight relationships.
Kevin?
I think a lot more emotional intelligence type skills, if that is even a thing, are going to start showing up as primary hiring requirements. I don't think that industries are ready to actually evaluate on that yet, but I think they're going to catch up pretty quick as the economies do get restarted in different places. But like, just an example of that is there's a lot of things out there that you can level yourself up really, really effectively. So there's masterclass.com, and they have a very affordable annual plan. I don't work for them or anything like that. It's not a sponsored plug, but I'm impressed with the amount of info that I can get from an expert for the amount of money that I paid for it. So like, for example, they have this FBI negotiator on there named Chris Voss with Black Swan Group. And I've heard him speak on podcasts before and wished I could have had more info about what he was saying. And you can through Masterclass. Well, that guy goes through all these ways that you can negotiate with extremely hostile people in a way that ends in a positive result. That skill doesn't seem on the surface to be directly connected to video conferencing. But if you think about the world you're going to live in, how much better our individual skill sets going to need to be able to respond to people and create those relationships that Elliot's talking about. Last show, I was talking a little bit about social styles and this ability or this skill of reading somebody's preferred communication method or interaction style. And those things are going to, it's being amplified. We're all complaining about the amplification of the attrition that happens with like the happy hours and stuff. But yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of skill building demand around how to become more emotionally intelligent and sensitive over this type of an interaction.
That's awesome. Whitney?
I think too, one of the hardest things about live streaming or just all being on at once is they're scared to look stupid in front of other people. And so one thing that I figured out is, because I'm also a part of this, scared of looking stupid in front of other people, like I'm scared now. But Instagram stories, the reason why I like them is because I can stop the recording and I can delete it and start over again. So I think that there's this time period we're in right now where everyone's just learning how to be okay with looking awkward on camera as they're learning how to look really good on camera, and being able to be okay with the thoughts that are coming out of their mouth that they can't just like stop and like re-record it. And I think I'm hoping that there's more technology around that in the pacing of live streaming and meetings, like even just having like a question that could be recorded video wise. I feel like people open up so much more when they're on video or they've been responded to via video than they do how we were operating things before, like blog posts or whatever, podcasts, anything. People just act so much differently now because they can see body language. And I know for myself, like I'm completely thrown if I'm on a video consultation and I see the person I'm talking to, their energy already drop, or like them checking out something in their house, like it throws me for a loop. So I'm very appreciative of how technology is moving very fast and trying to help people get over these humps.
It's almost
We
like
gotta run with that. We gotta figure out how to get people to submit video recorded questions to the show. That would be awesome.
Yeah, it's almost like adding social like legitimacy, just by having that kind like asking for that input or asking for that thing. Kevin.
Yeah, it's like the radio show call-in guest. I was just thinking about this because we're doing the show, that we're new at doing a show, and there's obviously people who are not new at that. A really well-known one that comes to mind is Leo Laporte, and he does this Twitch show, and he's done a bunch of different shows under that name. But the other day I came across a video where he was like very recently taking calls from people, and they were like on a call, and he must have staff there that's getting them ready to be on the call, because that's how it worked on the radio. I can't see it, avoiding that for quality purposes. But I think you're totally right. I can't remember where it was, but it was Blair Enns with Win Without Pitching. So Blair Enns and one of his coaches, the head of his training, Shannon, I forget her last name right now, I'm sorry about that, but they take questions on YouTube, and they've been having people like record the question being asked, and so they play the recording. And at first glance, I'll be honest, I didn't feel like the quality justified it. But now that I'm getting this perspective from this conversation we're having, I'm seeing a lot more of the insight they must have into that layer of authenticity there, that it does not feel, and it's impossible. You could fake this, but it's not worth the effort. But something that I'm just reading as a question, I don't have to believe as an audience member that came from an audience member. But when I hear a different person's voice asking a question, and maybe some phrasing that indicates that they're trying to learn something, or don't know quite how to ask the question, helps me believe everything that I hear after that.
That's great. Whitney?
Yeah, I only had realized this as we're talking, I guess, as you guys have been talking about it, realizing how I came to this conclusion. And it's because when you're having a conversation over Instagram's DMs, and the people are replying back to you as it's happening, sometimes you get this weird, like, you have this moment where you realize, oh, like this person literally can show me the best of themselves because they're able to re-record that. But they don't have that opportunity sometimes live. And you get with live a person's full personality, quirks, all the awkwardness, everything like that. But with I just think it's a really good opportunity to let people, they both have their advantages, but to let people show the best of themselves, to be able to record their questions beforehand. Because when you're on the spot live, I feel like their mind's just thinking about so many different things. So I think the technology will be so helpful, or finding a way to grow it.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a really good thought, and it kind of even opens up a little way to a question that was submitted by Kevin. He says, would you say there's an opportunity for innovation in translating physical communication standards to the digital world? And so the example he gives is, some say there are cultural or international differences in the way that we communicate physically, and have we seen those perceived differences translated to a digital over video setting? Or is it something that maybe this method of communication is changing other people's, or changing all of our standards in communication? How do you guys feel about that? Maybe we can take Sam.
This might be a low level example of this. Again, I don't use the FaceTime app very much, but again, with the FaceTime examples, in iOS 14, there's a new feature they've recently expanded it to FaceTime works when you're using it with multiple people, where your video will grow bigger if you're the one who is speaking. So that's already something that's implemented in a group chat. But something that is new coming to it is that if the camera detects that somebody is doing sign language, it will increase the size of their video as if they were speaking verbally, which to me is really cool. I don't communicate with people over sign language, so I'm not sure if Elliot might have known about that or not already, but it was just something that to me seems innovative and simple and obvious. Yeah, it's not a huge thing, but I thought when I saw that yeah, there is room to grow here.
That's an amazing example. Kevin?
Yeah, my mind goes really quickly from this question to the idea of like a business card exchange. Um, if anyone here did that ever in their life professionally. But I learned when I was really, really young in my first corporate job which was owned by a Japanese section of the company, that there's some cultural respect that is shown when you exchange business cards in Japan or with Japanese business people, and it's basically you physically show with your body language and your reaction that it's impactful to have been given that, because it's like this very culturally driven respectful exchange of two professional colleagues, and like there's a lot of just genuine respect that culture wants to display in that, like, we are first meeting kind of meeting, and it's important to them. And so I learned that from that company. But thinking through what Sam's saying now with the gestures being detected by the system you're using, and then some things I've seen in Unreal Engine that are newly becoming available, I do think you're going to see people for a while now try to bridge that. So I don't know what culture it's going to be that needs it more. Sign language is a great example of something that's not even so cultural. It is more about the basic communication and being smarter about the way people communicate. So like, if there are things that could detect people's facial expressions, I could see someone trying to bubble that up in a way that would be helpful. I don't know that it would work so well at the first attempt. But I saw something on Unreal recently that was really cool. And it was basically, Unreal Engine is a real-time processing engine. And so it can do a lot of physics and logic-based events around the visuals. And so they had an example of a person who was on a green screen. They were recorded and they were standing with their arms together. But as they gestured their arms out, they hit these boxes that were floating in space that weren't visible to the end video output, but they were visible to the game engine. And based on where their hand was and for how long it was there, different things were being triggered in the game engine. And so culturally, I could see that being a thing where, like, this is an important cultural element of communication, and so you're going to provide some, level of representation of that. But yeah, I have no ideas about what it would be. That sign language thing is the coolest thing I've heard of yet.
Like a digital handshake. Elliot?
So a lot of this is signaling, cultural signaling. And so like an example that comes to mind is in extremely population dense areas, people will spend a lot more money on their clothes than on their home. It's not about having different amounts of money, right? There's like people at all different wealth levels, but just in that environment, because it is so hard to have somebody over to your home, you will spend a lot more money on your clothes. And you're not signaling, hey, I have money. You're signaling like, I am like a tidy, responsible adult, and like I'm taking care of things, right? So it's like a positive social signal. And then in less dense areas, people will spend a lot less on their clothes, right? I'm thinking of like suburban jeans and t-shirt, and spend a lot more money on their home and their lawn, right? Like, and if you just think about like how much do those shoes cost versus how much does that lawnmower costs, people aren't spending like wildly different amounts of money, but they're spending them in very different places to signal like, I'm being a responsible person taking care of things. And I think there's a real danger with video that we'll see this big gap emerge where some people learn how to signal by getting good at using video and using conferencing tools and communicating in these mediums and like publishing and doing all of that stuff. And there's a real risk that we'll have a whole bunch of people get left behind. So I don't know quite how to fix that other than just like help my friends level up. But I think there's a real risk that people get left behind. The other technical innovation, I'm going to plug this every chance I can. I want smell-o-vision. We need to know what each other smell like.
It's going to happen. I'm sure it's going to happen. It's going
A lot
to
of insight.
faster than you think it will too. No, I've seen this. I think you're exactly right, Elliot. And I think you're going to see that gap, because that gap is mirrored socially throughout this world that we live in. But of the people, or of those that are spending resources or have the resources to spend on maybe higher production value in their video conferencing, and then those that that do not. And I've seen this especially in more developing countries. I was in Cambodia earlier this year, and I've noticed the interface for Facebook, which is by far the most widely used application on anyone's phone in that country, because it's one of the few websites that actually translates everything into Cambodian language. But I've noticed that the Facebook integration, or the interface, is completely different than the one I had on my phone, and it's because they've been able to read it, understand it, and then they are able to communicate. And then really what it's done is, traditionally in that culture, you communicate by going to someone's house and talking to them. But obviously with the invent of phone and this interface, they've been able to then change their communication styles to match more of a developing world's communication styles. So I think there will be a little bit of growth on both ends, but there's still going to be a gap in the middle, and that gap and navigating that gap, especially as more people work not just remotely but internationally, will be an interesting technology concept to take a look at. Elliot?
And it's so easy to forget that like culture is generational. And so it's easy to think of like, oh, there's an amount of change that I'm experiencing in a year or 5 years or 10 years, but we usually don't think, without being explicitly like telling ourselves to think about it, like a generational difference in how norms are like developed. Generationally, of course, things are going to be totally different. So I think we will see a whole lot more people end up with the same shared set of norms because they're all using these tools and learning them, the next generation.
Yeah, I agree. A question from Kevin asks, he says, so will there be an opportunity for tech that maybe levels the playing field? And we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but regarding video conferencing, is that possible? Something that comes out that maybe is adopted. We've seen that really recently with Zoom, right? Before, people used Skype, they used 5 or 6, and maybe at one organization you had several different video conferencing tools. Now a lot of people have adopted Zoom. Elliot?
It's happened at the point in time when there were more mobile phones in the world than there were toilets. That's officially when it happened. Like, that was several years ago. And so we'll see lots and lots of like incremental improvements, and like people learning like, hey, don't have the sun pointing right into the lens, and also innovating with like, hey, I'm like in a cool physical place where you can see the weather and I'm on my phone. But the phones have just become available to everybody and are so essential for basic human communication, for banking, for everything else, that they almost are like a right. Like, you need clean water, you need a place to live, you need a way to communicate. So that I see as the great democratizing technology.
Brandon?
And about twice a week, I attend educational meetings, and the age groups vary drastically. And I've noticed that a lot of the older ones who attend the meetings have learned very quickly how to adapt and use these technologies as well. They've all had phones with cameras, and learning to use Zoom and participate, raise your hand, is my mic turned on? Those were stumbling blocks at first, but very quickly they've been able to. It's nothing like the phrase, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. They're learning, and so the playing ground, the field is leveled for everyone here. The technologies are, as long as the UI is simple enough to where it's one button click and not like, where's this hidden at? Anyone can figure this out and get on board with video conferencing and talking amongst themselves.
Awesome. So actually, we have 5 minutes left, and I really would like to kind of just, with that time, kind of pivot a little bit with that same idea that Brandon mentioned in the discussion that we've been having. Are there some just kind of like, I can do this starting today with what I have? What are some tips, techniques that you would give to be able to have a more a better conversation, a more human-centered conversation over video? What are some things that maybe anyone that maybe say has a phone or has a computer would be able to do starting today, in particular, maybe even in a professional setting? Kevin?
Most people have access to lights in their house, but they are not very familiar with how to use those lights in a way that helps flatter them. And so there's a lot of YouTube stuff out there that can make you feel like you can't do it. But if you search around YouTube for like DIY lighting for video conferencing, people have made a lot of content, and not all their advice is going to be good, obviously. But if there's videos showing results of what they've done, that can tell you clearly, like, okay, this thing does this effect. So if I go get my lamp and I put this sheet here and I let the light get bigger by running it through the sheet before it hits me, did that actually make me look better on my video? And like, you can sort of just do those type of things as they apply to you. But the first thing I think anybody should do is just really thoughtfully, not under pressure, not like 5 minutes before they're meeting with their next potential job, like think through the things that matter to them about representing themselves. Like, how do you want to present yourself? Some people want to present themselves looking very professional. Other people feel like that's actually a hindrance to what they're doing, and that overly professional appearance is going to block people from being unguarded in the conversation. And so you got to think through that stuff to get a list of what matters to you. But light is like the easiest thing in the world to add once you realize it's missing. But if you don't ever look at it, you won't realize that's what it is.
Excellent. Whitney?
One thing that I recommend to my consulting clients is to just walk around with your phone in different lights in your house or outside and record yourself talking, because you're gonna mess up the first few times and you're gonna get really nervous on your calls if you don't prep yourself. So that's where it starts, is honestly, who has started their camera and then be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that was in the background, or like, oh, that isn't looking good at all. If you do that beforehand, just do a few little test clips, you'll be way more confident in knowing that you're looking professional or you're not going to be caught off guard.
That's awesome. We'll get Sam and then Brandon.
Something that I think is incredibly important is being familiar with the pain points of video conferencing and the barriers that just it's going to be exhausting for whoever you're talking to if it's going to be any extended period of time. Like we talked about with the fact that there are these barriers with normal human interaction that occurs when you are face to face, and then responding to that by essentially breaking down your interaction and the way that you speak into the simplest terms. And you're not face to face, and so you kind of twinging or like having some kind of nonverbal communication that would be a little nuanced, that would be intuitively picked up on in person, isn't going to happen. And so just communicating, basically keeping as much eye contact as we talked about, and then having an empathetic perspective on it too, of just if the other person is looking away a little bit more than you might think that they should, assuming positive intent, not thinking necessarily that you're being boring, but being responsive to it as well. And I think it's just a couple of core elements there that can really just, if you realize it's not the same thing as talking in person, then it can make it a bit more successful.
That's great. Whitney?
And labeling, like I feel like what Kevin talked about with the FBI negotiator, he talks a lot about mirroring and labeling things. So if you're noticing in a video that people are losing attention, to even just bring it up of like, oh, like, do you need to step away for a minute? Do you need a break? How are you feeling? I think that for me helps me not get so anxious if I can read someone's body language over camera and see that they're looking tired, or somebody just walked into the room, is just being like, hey, like I need to, or just put it on myself, say like, I need a little break. I don't know if you need a break too. But having that, I have like a little written out list of a checklist before I have a call, so that I know like these things could come up. This is how I'm going to handle it. And if you have that preparation, it just makes things go so much smoother.
That's awesome. And last comment, Brandon.
Yeah, and I was thinking that a good friend will tell you when you have food in your teeth. So if you're working with a team and they have, let's say, terrible video or terrible audio, and they're just not aware of it, or maybe they are and they're just scared to ask you for advice on the subject, maybe you could help them out with a few pointers. Like Kevin said, there's a lot of like do it yourself. You don't have to go out and spend a fortune on lighting, right? You could maybe send them a YouTube video on something that you could buy at Home Depot and rig up, or whatever the case may be. But we should help one another and give pointers. Don't be afraid to ask people, but at the same time, don't be afraid to make recommendations either. If especially, you know, these are people you work with. You want to everyone to reflect your company in a positive way, so you can help each other out in that aspect as well.
That is awesome. Thank you, Brandon. Sorry for skipping you there beforehand, but super valuable input. So that'll be it for our show today, and I'm sure we could talk at least another hour about this and kind of how it would go, but we don't want to be Zoom fatigued. We want to be engaged. So we are all engaged, so it's great. So just a reminder, if you are just to give you a little preview of next week, we do this show every Monday and Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you want to join the panel, feel free, like you feel like you want to add to the conversation. All are welcome. We open up our show about an hour early, and you can raise your blue Zoom hand, and we'll put you up on the panelists and get you audio and video checked. If you join by 11:45, then you can be on the panelists at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Next Monday, we have our discussion will be about technical certifications. What's the point? Is there a point? Really considering those. And then next Friday will be a more people ops discussion about thriving in a remote work environment, avoiding burnout. What are the things we can do to maybe change our context and how we make that boundary in our work life balance. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks those that attended, and we look forward to joining you again, talking with you again here this next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Bye everybody.